Everyone, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're at. Today we're going to talk about Dynamics GP 2018, of course, and we're going to kind of break that down into a couple of different segments. We'll talk about some of the new system requirements that 2018 is going to impose upon us, mostly on the server side. We'll actually go through how to upgrade, so what versions of Dynamics GP you would have to be on to actually get to 2018, and then spend a fair amount of time talking about the features that will actually be part of GP 2018 when it does release. And so the release date is projected for about December 1st, and Microsoft is pretty confident of hitting that date, and so I think it might actually come out a few days before the 1st, but the 1st of December will be the official kind of drop date for the product. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into this. You'll see 2018, when it does ship, it'll be version 18.00.0302, and those version numbers are important. Most people don't really pay any attention to those, and you don't really have to until it's time to upgrade or put a service pack on, and then that version number tells us exactly where we can go from there. And the reason that I call that out is when we look at how to get to 2018, those will be the version numbers that you want to go check on your current system, assuming you're a GP user today. When you log in, you will see that version number down in the lower left-hand corner of the login screen, and you want to check that on your current version. As we get towards the end of the presentation, I have a slide on what version number you have to be on to make the jump to 2018. And so that's an easy place to find it. You can also find it under Help and About if you're inside of the software, but this is the easiest place because all you have to do is open up the login screen here. Okay, so the first kind of section we'll talk about are the system requirements for GP 2018. The big change on the client side is Windows 7 is no longer going to be supported where GP is installed. So on your workstations, if you have Windows 7, you would have to move that up to Windows 8, 8.1, or 10.0. Now, 7 is really no longer supported by Microsoft, and so if you're on 7, you really need to be off that for other reasons anyway, regardless of whether you upgrade to GP 2018, so you don't want to be on an unsupported operating system. It's not that it's going to stop working. I think we all know over the years that there's still people running Windows XP out there, more than there should be. But the issue is, which again gets all the media attention and the press time, is if there's a security breach and you're on an unsupported platform, you could be hacked, to put it bluntly. When there are things like that get sent out, and that's almost a daily occurrence now, if not more, Microsoft really is only patching the operating systems that are supported. And so that's the real big reason why you don't want to stay on an unsupported platform on your desktops or your laptops or even servers, is because you want to make sure that when Microsoft patches those systems that you're in the group that gets the patch. And so anyway, GP 2018, we would want to be on 8, 8.1, or 10. Now, if you are on 7, I'll give you a little editorial here. If you're on 7, don't waste your time going to 8 or 8.1. Do go to Windows 10. 8 was, if some of you've used it and read the news over the last few years, since version 8 shipped, 8 was not the best product for the operating system. 8.1 was much better, much improved over 8.0. Windows 10 is even better yet, and 10 is a lot like 7, a slightly different interface, but you can actually run the Windows 7 interface on Windows 10. And so if you're on 7 and you're really used to it, you can make 10 kind of look like 7. In other words, the start button's back and things like that. And so if you're on 7 or something even earlier, don't don't stop at 8 or 8.1, just go all the way to 10. You'll be much, much happier. And so that's really the biggest change on the client or the workstation piece is no more Windows 7 if you go to GP 2018. A few kind of extra things. Way up at the top left there, Microsoft Office 2013 and 2016 will be the two versions that are supported. Lots and lots of people still run Office 2013, and you know, it's getting a little bit old, but it is still fully supported with GP 2018. If you have an older version of Office, Office 2010, for example, it'll still work, but there could be some things in GP 2018 that you're not able to do because it was built to work with 13 and 16 flavors of Office. And so it's not that you can't push a smart list out into Excel and so forth if you have an older version, but you could get a few things here and there that just don't work exactly right, and that would be why. Although, you know, it's usually minimal. Again, if you're doing a refresh, it is better to stay on something that's a little more current. And so either flavor of 2013 or 16, meaning 32-bit or 64-bit, of course. Adobe, a lot of people have Adobe to create PDFs, although there are many, many ways to create PDFs now, and many of those are free. You don't have to purchase Adobe, but some of you own it already. So you would want to be on Adobe 10, Adobe X as we say, but Adobe 10 or later for GP 2018. So if you have a really old version of Adobe Acrobat, you might want to upgrade that to 10, or well, actually you probably couldn't upgrade it to 10, but 11 is out there and still available. That's actually what I'm running. So just kind of keep that in mind. And of course, you know, GP runs fine on any kind of virtualized system. The technical specifications are Hyper-V because that's Microsoft's own VM system for virtual machine, but I haven't seen one personally that it does not run on. And so you don't have to use the Hyper-V, and many people do not. They use VMware, which is kind of the de facto standard in virtualization. And there's people running GP on virtualized systems that I've never heard the name before, and it runs just fine. And so really any VM system will typically work okay. The technical supported platform, though, of course, is the Microsoft Hyper-V. But again, if you're running VMware, you don't have to change that at all. Okay, now on the server side, this is where it's a little bit more problematic, possibly. The database, so our SQL server now for GP 2018 will have to be on SQL 2014 or SQL 2016. And so many people still run SQL 2008. That will have to be upgraded before you go to GP 2018. And so I know a number of people still run SQL 2012, which doesn't seem that old, but we're getting, you know, 5-6 years ago since 2012 was released. And so in technology, that is a long time. But you would have to do a refresh on your SQL Server software and get that upgraded to 14 or SQL 16. Windows Server itself, so the GP server where SQL is installed, has, of course, the Windows operating system on it, and that would have to be Windows 2012, 2012 R2, or 2016. And so it's a little bit confusing because the operating system itself has very similar numbers to the SQL Server version, and so that's on purpose to keep us confused. But make sure you separate those, and you know, you don't see an operating system for 2014. It was 2012 to 2016. The 2014, though, is the version of SQL that is the minimum version you could use. And so a couple of changes there on the platform. That doesn't happen on every release of GP, but this was kind of a one where they had to upgrade some of the system specs for the back end. And so just make sure that you don't get caught if you are planning on upgrading soon. don't get caught with an unsupported version of SQL. And it's not that it's not supported, it's GP won't install. And so they do have it blocked because they don't want people to try to force it into something not supported, and then there's a problem and we find out that, oh, well, they're using a bunch of old technology and it's, you know, not a way to kind of recover from some problems without restoring backups and whatnot. So just make sure you note those system requirements. So let's talk really about the product itself. So why upgrade to GP 2018? Well, these are kind of from a high level, some of the things that they have actually based the feature set on for GP 2018. And so the document attach, which you probably have all seen before if you've been on GP for a while, they have a pretty nice document attach system now, much better than what it was in the old days. And so they've really extended that, and we'll see what that really looks like on the next slide or two. So that's been a big effort on theirs for 2018. The user experience, that's really just kind of looking at what they could do to make it easier for users to get to the data that they're looking for. And so you'll see some nice things in some of the lookups that I think when you see them, it's like, oh yeah, that's long overdue. That would have been good, you know, 15 years back. Workflow, if you're using it, they've added a few workflow tools to the system. If you're not using the GP workflow, that's part of the software now. It's just a module that could be something that you might want to just take a look at and see. There's enough of it in there now that you wouldn't really want to use all of it, or you could. There's no reason that you couldn't, but it could be, you know, that you find one or two things that kind of make sense and start your experience with the GP workflow engine. But we'll talk about what they've added in GP 2018 to workflow. And then just kind of a barrage of features around the core financial part, kind of the accounting engine. And then they've done a few things in payroll and HR in 2018 as well. So from a high level, those are kind of the four buckets that the new features actually could get dropped into. And so when we start to kind of drill into you know, what this means, the Power BI I won't spend a ton of time on, but GP does integrate with Power BI, and of course Power BI is the most recent offering from Microsoft on creating charts and graphs and really looking at the financial data. Well, any data. It could be payroll, HR, could be manufacturing data, project data. We can see everything with Power BI. It's a lot like Excel or SQL reporting services reports, where we have access to the entire database. You'll recall with FRX and Management Reporter, those are general ledger only packages, and so we can only see financial data. With Power BI, we can see anything in the system. And so there is a connection between GP and Power BI now, and Power BI is a hosted offering by Microsoft. There is a free version, which you could go begin to check out and see if there's some things in there that you might like to do. There's also a paid version, which extends the capability a little bit beyond the free, of course, but the paid version is not what most people would classify as expensive. It's $9.99 a month per user. And so you know, if you just wanted one user and you wanted to try it out for a while, you could go spend $10 a month for a single user and really have full access to the Power BI system. Well, on your GP homepage, you can actually plug a connection into the Power BI site, because it is, again, hosted by Microsoft. You can plug yourself into your Power BI site and then have all those KPIs, those charts and graphs, key performance indicators, KPI. You can have that information feed down into your Dynamics GP system and be able to see those things that you've built in the Power BI site show up on your GP homepage. And of course, beyond that, you would want those to show up on your mobile device. So there's no restriction anymore on where we can deliver that information. It could be an iPhone or an iPad, Android, Windows device, of course, and so we're not really restricted at all. And so you see down at the very bottom of the slide kind of those three kind of main logos, the iOS, the Android, and the Windows there on the left. Microsoft is getting pretty agnostic to the platform, such as it is. And of course, just as a side comment, you could actually launch GP and run it on a Mac, on an iOS machine now, which we've had clients doing that for many years. And so it's you know, it's not restricted just to a Windows operating system anymore. So Mac devices that have a Pentium processor look like Windows to GP, and so we do have a number of people that launch GP every morning and run it all day working in it from their MacBook Air or you know, anything that they might bring that's not Windows. Back up to the document attach here on this slide, you'll see a lot of places that they've opened up the document attachment feature. It's been added to the receivables transaction entry window. It was in sales order processing today. It's going back to receivables, general ledger, employee inquiry, the I-9 form screen. So if you're doing payroll and HR in the system, you probably know there's a window in the HR module that allows you to capture the I-9 data, but it's really just a screen. Well, you have the ability now in 2018 to actually scan in a signed I-9 if you want to, and instead of keeping those in a file somewhere in paper form. So scan it in, save it, and then shred the original. And then some other things in vendor and customer areas, which we'll talk about here in a minute. They've extended it to project and fixed assets as well. So virtually throughout the system, now we see the document attach feature that is being deployed in 2018. Okay, so what's this mean? Well, here's kind of what it's going to look like. So in receivables transaction entry, we have, for the first time, the document attachment ribbon, or attached to the ribbon bar here. And so you see I've got it circled there in red. And this is the transaction entry window, of course. Well, we also have that in the receivables inquiry window as well. And so if we drill back from the inquiry window, we will see the document attach feature. And you might be saying, well, so what? That's nice. Well, the main thing is we'll be able to see documents that were attached during transaction entry. We'll be able to see in the inquiry window. And so a lot of times there's different security where people that have inquiry rights would not be the same people that did the actual transaction and had the data entry security. And so somebody might be on the phone with a customer in this case. Well, they have full inquiry access. Well, they weren't able to see, or today they're not able to see those documents that were attached. And so those will be exposed to the inquiry windows. And as an option, the folks that just have inquiry kind of read-only rights to those windows will also be able to attach documents now. And so that's a big change, and I think a good one. There are limited users available, so if you have limited user licenses, those users today can only run reports and can view data. They can't actually enter anything. They can just look at it. Well, there'll be a small exception made in 2018 where limited users that have that read-only security available to them would actually be able to attach documents if we allow them to in the system. And I'll kind of show you where that allowance piece is here in a second or two. So same thing extended into the general ledger entry. And so when we're doing journal entries, we don't have to use the little kind of post-it note yellow pad there just to the right of the journal entry number. Most of you are familiar with that. If you've used the system for a long time, you know about the little notepad there. Well, that's kind of the old document attach feature. The new feature really is the paperclip there, and that will in 2018 be moved up to the ribbon so that we can attach documents without going through the old way, we can attach documents directly into the journal entry here. And so you can still get there through the old way, and if you probably figured that out, but if you click on the yellow kind of little post-it note there, you can click on the paperclip and get to the new document attach feature, but that takes you a couple of clicks to get to. Here in 2018, they're just pulling, on this screen, they're just pulling that back to the main ribbon. Now that did not exist in the inquiry windows and so forth, and it didn't exist in receivables management. And so they have added a lot of things, but in this particular case, they're bringing it just back to the main screen. So same idea for employee inquiry, and so you see here the employee maintenance kind of behind the back window there, and then in the foreground, the employee inquiry. So maybe you have people that can only view employee data. Well, you'll see that they do have the ability to attach documents as well as view documents that were attached to the employee maintenance window, to the employee card. And so, and you see here the little paper clip with a note on it, which I've got circled in red there on the employee inquiry window. You see that there is something back there. And so that is a big change there, is to allow people that have the view access only to be able to do the document attach. Here's the I-9 screen, and so the attachment here is also new, and so we have that now on the ribbon in version 2018. And of course, there's no inquiry window. This is the one and only place to deal with the I-9 form. And so we'd be able to, again, kind of in my earlier comment, be able to take an I-9 that somebody had physically signed, scan that directly into the window and attach it, and get out of the business of filing that in a big notebook or file cabinet someplace that we have to keep for X number of years. We'd be able to produce an electronic copy of that if we were called upon to do so. So here's the notes from the vendor screen. And so again, you see kind of in the background there the vendor maintenance window, and you'll see the little notepad there with lines on it where I have typed notes into the vendor maintenance. Well, now those will be brought forward into the vendor inquiry, and so same with customers. So if you put notes on the master record, those would be available for viewing in the inquiry system, so that anybody that would look at this vendor or customer would be able to see the notes that were put on the master record. And so today that feature is not there. And so if somebody has view only and they can get to the inquiry screens, but they can't see the card or the maintenance windows, they don't know that there might be notes attached to the customer or the vendor in this case. And so that's a nice little feature that they're plugging in there. And so here's the same idea on the customer side, so it works exactly the same way. Any typed notes that would be on the master record then flow to the inquiry screen. You'll notice on these inquiry windows, so here I didn't circle it, but you'll notice up at the top ribbon there, just to the right of the OK button on the customer inquiry for screen here, you'll see the attach feature there. And so this is the ability to attach documents even though you have viewing rights only here with the inquiry system. And so that's going to be the one exception of someone that can view only. We could grant them the ability to attach documents in our setup. Same thought in project accounting. And so if we put notes onto the project window, those would then pull forward into the project inquiry screen. And so works exactly the same way. And then finally on the fixed asset, kind of the master record here, the card, the fixed asset general information window, we also have the document attach feature being added there. So you see that on the ribbon, the traditional paperclip there where we can open and scan multiple pages directly into this record. Or if we have something already sitting out on a network drive and we just want to go get it, we can do that as well. But either or works with the document attach feature the way it is today. And I didn't put the inquiry window in here, but the you'll see the second bullet point there on the left. The same theory holds true, that we would be able to attach documents on the asset inquiry window if we decide that feature is something we want. We'd be able to do that in fixed assets just like we would in customers and vendors and project and so on. And so here's where this gets set up. And so this document attachment setup window actually has a new section on it now, and you'll see I've got it circled there in the middle of the window. We check the box. We want document attachments to be added to the inquiry windows, and it's not, you can't say I want it in customers but nowhere else, or I want it in fixed assets but not in customers or vendors. No, it's kind of an all or nothing. You turn it on for all inquiry windows or nothing. You do, as an option, have the ability to put a password on that. And so if you do turn it on, you could create a password that someone would have to know to be able to go ahead and attach a document through the inquiry screens. But again, it's one password for all. So if somebody knows the password because they attach, or you want them to attach documents in the vendor system in payables, well, that same password would grant that functionality to the fixed asset window or the project window or customer window and so forth. And so I suspect that over time they will probably split that up, meaning in future versions Microsoft will split that up and may expand this security piece to control it by module. But this is release number 1 for bringing the document attachment into the inquiry system. And so right now it's everything. But I would guess, just knowing the way they do things, I would guess that over time they will break that up, and we'll have that granularity into the different modules for each module's inquiry window, maybe with its own password would be my guess. And so that's not going to be in 2018, but in the future, I suspect we'll see that. Okay, so we get down to user experience. Well, what are we talking about there? This is the ability for users, so people that work in the software every day, to be able to get to data with fewer mouse clicks, to be able to sort out the data easier and quicker in the way that they need to, and not the way that Microsoft thinks that we all should be using the system. And so we'll go through a number of these. The first one is the ability to sort the receivables and the payables transaction inquiry window. And so you'll see in the foreground the transaction inquiry by document, in the background the same window but by customer. And you'll notice the sort by line kind of in the top part of the window there before all of my transactions are listed. You'll see that that's new. And so what I want to do is actually close down the slide for just a minute, and I want to show you a little bit better. I do have version 2018 here loaded. It's not, this is a beta copy, and so not every feature is in this version, but you'll kind of get the idea of how this additional sorting works. And so here I've gone into purchasing. If I do transaction by vendor and just bring up a vendor, this document row is what's been there since literally day 1, and we can toggle things by date or type, document number, and so forth, but that really was all we could do to get to the data. And so if I said, well, maybe I'm looking for a payment here, I could redisplay that, and so I see all my payments, and that was kind of the end of it. Well, in my sample data, I've only got a handful of them, so this is pretty easy. But if you've been on the software for 25 years and never taken any history out, you know that there can be a lot of stuff in these windows. Well, what they've done in 2018 for customers and vendors is they've added this sort by line right here. So now I can sort by additional fields, and then I can sort high to low, ascending to descending. And so if I wanted to sort this by document date, for example, and then ascending or descending, you'll notice that as I toggle this, that the data immediately responds to this second level of sort. And so we've got now a little bit better matrix on how we're presented back with the data. One thing that I think was really good personally is they put in here the original amount and the unapplied amount. And so we can now sort by maybe if you're looking for a particular dollar amount, and let me just set this back to all here. And so maybe I'm looking for a particular dollar amount, and so I can sort by the original transaction amount, whether that was invoice payment, whatever it might be. And so maybe here I am just looking at invoices, and I can look either, again, ascending, descending for a certain document amount, or I can toggle over to the unapplied amount. And of course, you know that that's what's left. And so so those, I think, really were big requests that they got from users on, give us a little bit more ability on these windows to make things a little easier to get to. Now, this doesn't consider the all-in-one view, which is actually not a 2018 feature, but came out in 2013 originally on looking at transactions. Let me just open it since I mentioned it. And so here we have the ability to see really everything to do with a customer or a vendor. And so some of you that are on more current versions may be using this already, but if you're on 2013 or later and this looks new to you, you should go check this out, because this is a very powerful way to actually see data. And so I'm just pulling in history here just because I don't have a ton of stuff. Let me switch vendors and see if I can get a little bit more. I don't have a ton of data, of course, in the sample company here, but you'll see here as I kind of now go back and recall in the history since I switched vendors, all of these transactions for this particular vendor are all here together. That's why it's called the all-in-one view. And so if I want to see this PO, for example, of course, you know the blue, the drill down, you can drill back into the data. But if I tick off this PO, I can see everything to the right of that. I can see where it was received. Has this PO been invoiced yet? No, it hasn't. Of course, it hasn't been paid yet either, because there's nothing there. And so if I can start backwards, and so if I see, well, what does this payment right here actually include? Well, it would look back and see that there was an invoice, well, a receipt, and of course this must have been a receipt and an invoice, because there's nothing in the invoice column. And so if you use the PO and receiving part of the system, you know that part of the receipt can actually enter the payables invoice. And so I see that this receipt actually ended up on that payment, and we see from the dollar amounts that they are the same, and so I can kind of tell there's nothing else on that particular check or payment record there. And so again, 2013, this was added for payables. It was added into 2015 for customers, so we can do the same thing on the customer side. We can now do it on the inventory side as well. And so if you're on 2013 or later and you haven't looked at this, make a note, and sometime before the end of this week, go check this out and see. You'll fall in love with it, I'm sure. But if you're kind of old school and you like this older style window and ways to get to the data, the good news is in 2018, they have built these additional sort functions for us, so we'll be able to slice things up in a little bit easier way. And so again, that works on payables for vendors and in receivables for customers exactly the same way. Okay, so I wanted to spend a little bit more time on that and kind of show that and how that worked, because that is such a new thing and is very, very nice to be able to add those now to those windows. So okay, so the other thing which kind of drove people crazy was if you do have access to the system password and you go in and out of the system menu throughout the day, especially if you're doing a lot of things and you keep going into user security, maybe you've got somebody new or you're rearranging security. Well, every time you open something off the system menu, you had to stop and put in the system password. Well, rightfully so, but that took a lot of time. If you're just going in there, once a month or once every 6 months, that's no big deal. But if you constantly go in and out of there in the course of a day or a week, where you're doing a lot of edits in that area, it took a lot of extra time and keystrokes to put that password in. Well, in GP 2018, you'll only have to put that password once into the system. as long as your GP is open. And so if you log in, you're in and out of the system menus. The first time you'll be prompted for the password, which is what you see on the screen. Until you close GP, if you go back into the system menus, you will not be asked for the password. They will kind of store that temporarily for the session, and you won't have to put that in again. Now, as soon as you close GP, if you go to lunch or you go home, but as soon as you shut down the software, when you come back in, then that password is no longer saved. So if you go back into the system menu after closing GP, you'll have to put that back in one more time, and then that will hold for the day or for the time that you're logged into the software. And so, but every time you log in, of course, you'd have to put it in at least one time. And so that's not a huge thing unless you're kind of the power user or the system admin, and then that's kind of a big thing. And so that'll be nice to have. They did this, I consider kind of a minor thing, but maybe just to modernize it a little bit. Everywhere the word check showed up in the payables system, they've renamed to payment or payments. And so all the menu choices where it would say edit check batch or edit vendor check or build check batch, they've just simply replaced the word check with payment or payments. And so just to modernize it a little bit, because a lot fewer people actually pay with checks. A lot of people are doing electronic funds transfer, the EFT, maybe a credit card or some other electronic method of payment. Some people actually pay with PayPal which gets taken from their bank account, or PayPal goes on to their company credit card and then they pay that and so on. And so they just went through and kind of did a mass update. So anywhere you're used to seeing the word check in the accounts payable system, you'll now see the word payment or payments. Not really a new feature, just more of a modernization technique there. If anybody's using the web client, and we realize a lot of people have not used that in the past, but if you haven't checked it out, it is a pretty stable tool now. It was built on Silverlight when it first came out, and it was a little flaky, quite honestly, but they rewrote it completely for GP 2016, and it's built on HTML5, and so it's much more stable, it's much easier to work with, it's much faster, and if that's something you've been wanting to try, but just were a little reluctant, well, now would be the time that you're probably safe doing that. The Silverlight piece was not really a good idea, but that was the tool, and so they have scrapped that and started over with HTML5. So if you are using the web client, the autocomplete, as you kind of see there on the customer maintenance window, that didn't really work very well in the web client, and so actually it didn't work at all, so quite honestly, but it does now in 2018, and so if you do have people using the web client, they would have the same experience with the autocomplete that your normal desktop client users would have. Smart list favorites, and so this is a subtle change, but kind of a big one. So today in the product, if you create a smart list, you can actually put a password on it. If you create a smart list favorite. So if you open a Microsoft, here I open the customers, all I did was rename it with my name - customer list there under the name. Well, then it becomes mine, and I could, as an option, put a password on that, but the problem is that password was shared by everybody that created smart list favorites. And so, if we had 50 users in the software, we basically had to give that password out 50 times. Well, it kind of defeats the purpose if every user in the system has the password, because that means there's no security. And so what the password does is stop someone from editing your smart list favorite. So if you go to a bunch of trouble to create your own favorite and save it, and then you come back the next month and run it, and it looks totally different, well, somebody made it their favorite, overwrote yours, probably by accident, you would hope. But in any event, they overwrote your favorite to make it their own, maybe not knowing what they were doing. Well, then your favorite's gone. And so, and again, you could have a password today, you could password protect it, but if we all create favorites, we would all have the same password to edit those favorites. Okay, well, they fixed that. So now every time you create a favorite, you see on the top screen there where I've created the Bryan-cust list and I've got it visible to the system. Well, you see I've actually put a password in the password box there. And of course, I could go back into that with the blue arrow. So maybe I come back the next day and I click on the little blue expansion arrow. That opens the window on the lower part of the screen, the Change Smart List Favorites password. I can type in my old and then reset that if I want to. So maybe I inadvertently gave that to someone to make a change to it. So now two of us have the password. Well, that person made the change and it's good. Well, I really want to kind of password protect it again. So I changed my old password that I gave out, put a new password on it that only I know. And then from there, nobody can edit that favorite. It remains mine. And so this really is the way it should have worked early on, but it didn't. We all now can have our own password that we make up when we create a favorite. Of course, you know, for you to edit it, you'd have to remember what the password was, or even you wouldn't be able to edit your own. So that's going to be in 2018. Kind of back to the web client, I probably should have reorganized that slide and put it closer to the web piece, but they've added the ability to create a shortcut, or they've actually put the shortcut on the web client kind of toolbar there, so you can get into SmartList with one click. You don't have to navigate anywhere else to open SmartList. It will be right up there on kind of the main menu bar there at the top, and it will remain there. Also in the web client, the bank reconciliation window, if you use that part of the system in the financial module, the bank rec window was very small and could not be resized. And so that was more of a bug than anything else. Well, they fixed that now, and the bank rec window in the web client will appear to be the right size now. It'll maximize the window instead of being a little bit microscopic. Okay, so in bank reconciliation, since we were talking about that, if you do use the bank rec feature of the software, they've added some sorting capabilities now into bank rec. So we used to be able to go in and sort transactions by type and by date. Well, they've actually added the ability to sort by payment or deposit, and then also do the ascending and descending within the bank rec. So if you're still clearing transactions kind of the old-fashioned way here with ticking off the cleared box there, this will be a big help. I might also suggest that if you're doing it that way, you look at the electronic reconcile module. You would own that, and so nothing really to buy, just a little bit of setup time, which is not difficult, to take some of the heavy lifting out of that. And when you download a file from your bank, let the e-reconcile piece run and go in and check off the checks and deposits for you. And then all you have to do are kind of the exceptions, maybe a service charge or a wire fee or interest income or something that might be running through the account that you wouldn't have in the reconcile window yet, and not spend too much time ticking off checks as they clear. So that's kind of the old way of wasting time. Okay, this slide looks a little bit bad here, but kind of the last piece of this is optimizing the financials and then what they've done with workflow. So we'll talk through a few of these. So if you use analytical accounting, you know right now the security to AA dimensions, it's a little clunky. And so in 2018, they're giving us the ability to put well, they put the copy button up there on the ribbon, and so they give us the ability to copy user access from one user to another. And so much like we can in the core system security, we'll be able to do that in the AA security as well. And so it's kind of a tedious now. It's not hard, it's just time consuming to go through and click all the different dimensions and give users access to analytical accounting dimensions today. They've added the ability to create a customer statement, just like you could if you go into the routines and sales and statements. They pulled that functionality back to the customer windows. So both the customer card, the maintenance card, and the inquiry, you'll be able to generate a customer statement for that customer, whichever one is open, and then send that out or print it or email it, or however you get statements out, right here from the card. You won't have to go into routines and do that if you're just looking for a single customer statement. So that's kind of a nice little thing to have. Purchase order, well, they have done a couple of things here. If you use PO Generator, they have taken the step to put a list here, which is kind of in the foreground and at the bottom. So right in here, they've created a list view now for purchase orders that were created with PO Generator. Well, they don't have to be created with PO Generator, but any PO that was created, so that the PO Generator user can actually see the POs, because sometimes they found that the user that's actually generating the purchase order doesn't actually have the security to go to the PO window and print or email that, so they set the status from new to released, that is a different person in some companies. Well, the person that did the PO Generator doesn't always know, did that PO actually go? I mean, what's the status of it? And so they created this list view. And so we see kind of in the foreground here, we can go still view the PO, and maybe the PO person actually changed it from whoever did the PO Generator. And so this is a way to kind of keep that security intact, but still give the person that generated it kind of read-only or view-only access to what's going on with a particular purchase order. And so that will be in GP 2018. Of course, if we do that, if we use PO Generator, or if we use requisitions to initiate POs, or we just key in a PO, the PO number actually didn't flow to the home page, and this is kind of limited to the requisition part. But if we do use requisitions, we could see the status of the requisition, but we didn't really know, well, what PO number actually came about because of my requisition. So they've added to the home page plugin for the requisition piece, which I've got kind of yellowed there, highlighted. They've added a column to that to show the actual PO number. So once a requisition is approved and turned into a PO, then that displays on the home page so that everybody looking at it knows what that link is. They've also created a requisition report, and so we could run a report of all of our requisitions and see the status and approval and kind of the workflow and where it is along the line. You can do that one by one now if you go into each requisition, but they've added a nice report that will pull all of those together for us so that we can see what's going on. If you use order entry, so in sales transaction entry, SOP, sales order processing module, we call it. If you've been on GP for a while, you remember that if you put a document on hold, it used to put a little stop sign on the order entry screen. Well, then that kind of went away with the ribbon being added to the software. Well, they're bringing that back. And so you see I've got it highlighted there that if a document, if we do put it on hold, it will display the stop sign kind of on the document. They've also added the ability that if you click on that stop sign, it'll actually open the process holds window, so we can work with the holds, whether it's viewing it only or whether we're a person to put a hold on or take a hold off. We then can take action. We don't have to click 2 or 3 times to actually get into the holds. We can just double click the stop sign and the holds window will open up for us. Also in payables, so back to payables, they've taken the ability to write a payables check 1 per vendor or 1 per invoice, which is on the select payment batch over on the right there, called select check batch in your system. You'll see I've got the orange arrow pointing to it. Well, they put a new option in there. Instead of just 1 payment per invoice or 1 per vendor, there's a new option in the drop down, which I've selected, which says use the vendor option. So back on the vendor card under the options button, you'll see I've got on the left screen there, you can set the vendor to kind of permanently be 1 check per vendor or 1 check per invoice. And so that way, when you're running checks, you can tell your check selection batch just go look at my vendors, and whatever they're set as, that's what I want you to do when I print these checks. And so you can still override that. And so on the checks or the payment selection here on the right, you could set that to 1 payment per invoice and ignore what's on the vendor card this time around. Or the way I have it set, you're telling the system, just go look at the vendor, whatever I have set up there, that's what I want you to do. So that's a cool little thing that will be in 2018. Along with that, now you'll be able to save your payment selections. So of course you can save the batch, but the settings on this window, when you build your payment batch, you'll be able to save that. You'll see I've got it highlighted up there, and assign a payment ID. And that way it'll remember all those settings that you put in there. And so you won't have to go remember which boxes you ticked and you know, all the ways that you want the payments to be built. It'll just save that for you. So if you have a weekly check run or a monthly check run, you can save the settings and change them as needed, run your checks, but the settings will then save for next week's batch. If you have payroll and HR, you could not control the garnishment reports, and so they've added that to the posting setup, that you can actually control where the garnishment detail and summary reports print. Not a big deal there, but also in payroll and HR, they changed the functionality on the roll down feature. So when we set up pay codes or deductions or benefits or shift codes, will be presented now. Do we want to roll this down? It was a yes or no before. Well, that rolled that down to inactive employees. When maybe we change a pay code setting, well, we really don't want to go back to inactive people and change it, because the way it's stored really is the way it happened. And so with 2018 now, we'll be able to roll down to all records, including our inactives, or roll down to just active employees only. I think the last thing in payroll, HR, they've given us the ability to change a department with the professional services tool, the PSTL tools. We could change pay codes, benefits, and deductions today. We can't change departments. Well, they're giving us the ability to do that. Oh yeah, and then in some lookups here, we can exclude inactive employees in some of our deduction lookups. They just hadn't gotten that in there. Workflow, last topic, is they've added a reminder now, so that the workflow engine will send out a reminder email if the workflow is sitting there before it moves it on to the next approver, or whatever it's supposed to do if it dies. So here I've got a workflow set for 8 hours, but you'll see the reminder now where the yellow arrow is. I want a reminder email sent in 4 hours to this person, and that way, you know, once the 8 hours hits, it'll go on and do its next step. But you know, sometimes the person's like, oh, I didn't see the email or something, and so here we can kind of bombard them a little bit, at least with one more additional approval or reminder. We can copy workflow steps, and so that's a nice thing if you are using workflow. They built a workflow report, so we can see the status of certain things that are going through the workflow and all the different things that's stored on the window right now. So this is nothing new, other than we'll be able to print a report on what the workflow history is that we now see on the window only. They've added some new fields to some of the workflows. That's a little less important, but if you're using workflow, you'll pick those up. But they have put a few more things in the drop down there. They've added one workflow, which is GL account approval. Right now there's just GL batch approval, and so that is that will be in 2018, where if we're going to add new GL accounts to the system, we could potentially put workflow in there so that someone has to approve a new account going into the chart, and we do that through the workflow, just like we could with the other. Vendor approval is one that's pretty popular in the workflow today. They'll have a receivings transaction workflow, so if we want the receipt of goods to be approved through workflow, we'll be able to do that. and some fields to handle that. Okay, so last thing, how do we get to 2018? If you're on 2013 or earlier, no direct path, so you'll have to make multiple jumps or hops. You do have to be on GP 2015, and that will be the update 0898, the 14.00.0898. It'll be the 2015 year-end update from last year, from 2016. And so that came out in December of 2016. You would have to be on that version or later to go directly to 18. If you're on GP 2016, it would be the July of 2016 update, so the mid-year update or later. 0439 is the version number when you log in that you want to look for, or a higher number, so or later, because those numbers go up as they release different versions. And so those are the two direct paths. Now, if you're not on one of those, that of course doesn't mean that you can't get there. You just have to get to one of these before you get to 2018. And so if you're on 2013, you'd have to go from 13 to 15, this particular version of 15, and then on to 18, or you could go from 13 to 2016 to 2018 based on these version numbers. And so with that, that was a pretty quick, very fast overview of some of the things that are going to be in GP 2018 when it ships December 1st. Ashley, do we have questions or comments in the queue that we need to talk about?
We do.
Okay.
We have a handful of questions.
All right.
So going back to when you were discussing document attachment and general ledger entry, where are the attached documents stored? Are there any concerns about storage capacity?
Yep, that's a good question. They are stored now in the SQL database. They were stored in a file that was on a network drive, and a lot of people didn't realize that. And so if you upgraded your server and so you had a new server, you got all your databases off, but a lot of people forgot those notes or those documents were sitting out there on a folder. So with GP 2013, all that got moved into the SQL database, so it's in there with your company. It's backed up every night or more, and if you move servers, it's with your data. And so no real worry about size. They compress that pretty good, and so you know, it's not that it will never be noticeable, but it's not something really to worry about for many years, because they are compressing those down. So yeah, it's all part of your database now.
Great. And then is there a drag and drop feature with the new document attachment features?
There's actually not, but I hear that's on the list for sometime in the future. So that's a great suggestion, and Microsoft's heard it a few times already.
Okay. And then referencing when you're talking about displaying customer notes on the customer inquiry window, does this include being able to attach screenshots of emails to any of the modules?
It could, yes, because anything that you can store electronically, you can attach to GP, into the records. And so whether it's a master or transaction, whatever it might be. So if you do a screenshot of an email and you save that out on your C drive somewhere, from GP, you can go retrieve that. You don't have to scan directly into GP. You can go retrieve a document that's already sitting out there electronically. So Word, Excel, PowerPoint, PDF, Snippet, Snagit, whatever, you know, anything that stores something electronic, you can pull in. So yes, that would work fine.
Okay, next question. If you forget your SmartList favorites password, are you out of luck?
Yes. No. No, there will be a way to go into the database, into the SQL database, into the table, and actually overwrite that, is my understanding. I haven't seen that, and I haven't tried it on my 2018, but I did read that there'll be a way to kind of go through the back door and set that.
Okay, and I think you might have already discussed this. What version of SQL Server is recommended with this GP release, and what is the minimum version supported?
So you would have to be on SQL 2014 or SQL 2016 to run GP 2018. So really the most two current versions, no SQL 2012, no SQL 2008, 14 or 16.
Okay, and the last question is, will GP 2018 support SQL Server 2017?
No.
Okay.
Well, it doesn't. It doesn't today. My gut feeling is when that is released, yes, Microsoft will test it because that release date is not that far off. So it's not supported today because it's not released. Once it releases, then they will test it, and I'm certain that they will support it. But if you were upgrading today, even though 2018 is not available today, but if you were upgrading today, you'd want SQL 2014 or 2016.
Thanks, Brian. So if there's
Okay.
no additional questions, I just want to thank everyone for attending today's presentation, and thank you, Brian, for giving us a great overview of GP 2018 today.
All right. Well, thank you, Ashley, and thank you, everyone on the line. Let us know if you have any questions.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye.